kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a weird past couple weeks. Definitely a weird last week.
Yeah. At the egg farm?
Egg farm, just in general, the world, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All the shit going on.
It adds a particularly potent dynamic to the equation when you have offspring and you're going, Jesus Christ, you know?
Yeah.
It's not as easy to sit there and just, I can't come out with a gig bag or a boogie bag and just get the hell out of Dodge. It's
like, I'm only marginally invested. You're fully invested.
Yeah. Well, not just, even if I got out of Dodge with the fam, it's like they're here. They're just starting out, and it's just absurd. It's absurd, a lot of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah.
And it's...
Go ahead, Benj. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's frustrating, and it's, anger is definitely an emotion that's there. Fatigue.
Oh, yeah. We're going to talk a little bit, especially, I think, in particular about the Democratic leadership's response to a lot of what has been happening recently. And really what was happening like 6 months ago when we kind of knew this was coming down the pipe. And let's just go ahead and break into introductions right now. Hello, welcome to whatever this is. I'm David. I'm the person talking right now. Jake.
This is Jake. I'm the talking bear.
This is Ben. I'm the trucker guy.
And if you haven't already sort of picked up from our conversation, the Supreme Court recently made a huge ruling last week, one that kind of shaked our, one that really, shook the very foundation of this country to its core. This is a bit, so hang in there with me. The Supreme Court recently ruled that you cannot sue cops if they violate your Miranda rights. Sorry, I got my notes mixed up. The Supreme Court, in a landmark decision, one that's going to shake this nation to its very foundations, recently ruled that it's okay to pray at school so long as it's on a sports team. Sorry, that was a different decision, not the one we're going to talk about tonight. In a recent Supreme Court ruling, one that's going to shake this nation to its very core, the Supreme Court recently sided with the government to help defund Medicare from needy hospitals who use too much of it. Sorry, my notes are mixed up. Let's see. The Supreme Court, in a recent ruling, one that's going to shake this nation to its very core, has recently ruled that public funds can indeed go to religious schools. No, that's the wrong one too. What else did they rule on? Supreme Court, in a recent ruling, one that's going to shake this nation to its very core, has eroded tribal sovereignty by ruling that Supreme Court actually has jurisdiction over certain crimes that happen on Indian territory.
Oh, that one I didn't know about.
Yeah.
They also ruled that states, as a means of maintaining their sovereignty, have jurisdiction ultimately over tribal lands, because a tribal land is part of a state. And in order for a state to have its sovereignty, it has to be able to rule all parts of itself, which is hissing on 200 years of precedent.
Right.
But I'm pretty sure that's not the one you're talking about, Dave.
I'm pretty sure that's not the one. All right, the one we're actually talking about, the recent Supreme Court ruling. You got ahead of me on that one. Yeah, they recently ruled limited the EPA's authority to regulate carbon emissions. No, we're talking about abortion. The Supreme Court recently overturned Roe v. Wade. Something that we kind of knew was coming down the pipe 6 months ago when that draft document leaked out of the Supreme Court, which was something that kind of shook a lot of people because nothing really leaks out of the Supreme Court. That's kind of been the one branch of government that has really kept kind of the tightest lid on its internal communications and stuff like that, and kind of what they what they do internally, like nothing really comes out of there, as opposed to something like Congress, where leaking is like part of your communication strategy.
Yeah, the court only started doing actual like recordings, I think, in like Roe versus Wade right around that time.
Wow.
So like mid late 70s. They didn't even do court transcripts before then, really. It's always just been dissents and opinions.
Which seems insane. And I think everyone's kind of getting a really like a crash course in civics right now as they kind of figure out one that the Supreme Court basically sits down to essentially dump out all their rulings for the year like once a year, especially when they only sit down for a certain period of time to also even hear
Yeah.
these cases come before them. But but yeah, they overturned Roe v. Wade on a completely just bullshit like party line vote. Uh, they completely stripped out, and we'll go into more detail about it, but they completely stripped out the 14th Amendment protections that were inside it, basically saying that due process has no place in American society anymore. I guess we'll talk about the knock-on effects and the ramifications of this ruling as well, because turns out there was a lot of other legislation that was tied specifically to this ruling that doesn't have anything to do with abortion.
And they pointed fingers at next targets, which is scary.
Which is insane. And also, you know, a sitting Supreme Court justice talking about how they use fetal tissue in vaccines, which they actually don't. That's a weird, like, anti-vaxxer, like talking point that you read like in a Facebook comment underneath a really shitty meme or something like that. But one thing I really wanted to do in terms of like preparing for this conversation, because like we're three dudes talking about something that is essentially a medical procedure that mostly affects women, like people who are capable of like carrying and like gestating like life. And there's
Both with uteruses.
right, yeah.
Well, I have a slightly unique perspective on the subject that I haven't heard anyone else be able to give or voice.
Hit me with it.
I am the result because my mom had an abortion. Because she had the option for abortion, I was born. Had she had that first kid, I would not exist. So it's yeah, I have an interest in women having a choice because who knows how life's going to turn out for them and what kids are going to result. It's not for me to say. It's not my body. It's not my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure we're gonna go into a lot of in particular the talking points, and I think the conversation that is really centered around this issue and is centered around this place, or centered around this particular ruling, this particular medical procedure. Because I'm very much from the position that an abortion is a medical procedure, like it is medicine. One thing I wanted to do to kind of make sure I had the context to even kind of talk about this thing was I wanted to do a little bit of research and figure out exactly what we're talking about colloquially.
Colloquially.
Yeah, there you go. When we talk about it casually, well, what are we actually talking about when we talk about abortion? And like the actual like definition of abortion is just termination for pregnancy or like
Yeah, the
removal.
fact that people call contraception abortion.
It's insane. So it's just like
Ah,
like an abortion, as just in its most broad definition, is just like the removal of like a fetus. And there was a really important distinction immediately after that, that there's like two different kinds of abortion that are largely recognized. There is spontaneous abortion, and there is induced
induced. Yeah.
abortion. And spontaneous abortions you might know better by their other name, which are miscarriages. So in hunting down further information about this, I wanted to know, okay, so there is induced abortion. What kind, like under what circumstances medically do induced abortions kind of enter into the conversation? And it's a really quick short list of just the myriad of issues that might call for an induced abortion as treatment. It turns out that pregnancy is a major medical event, something that I'm sure, Benji, you have a lot of experience with as a father of three.
They
That
grow a human. They develop an organ from scratch.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Complete new
And
organ.
then grow another human.
Yeah.
The placenta in and of itself is like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. And the myriad of issues, the myriad of medical problems, the sheer risk just to a person getting pregnant and carrying a pregnancy to term is kind of massive. And it's really kind of a numbers game that anyone sort of goes from start to finish without any sort of major issue. That it's one of those things where I also wanted to really try to track down the definition as well, because I don't know to what extent a lot of these bans, I have not read any of the language in a lot of these states that are starting to enact these like trigger laws that as soon as this court case was overturned, they were going to basically spring into action and immediately close and cease like abortion services in their state. As to whether or not there was even like a definition in that legislation that separated miscarriages from induced abortions, from elective induced abortions versus therapeutic induced abortions, where one is meant to save the life of the mother, whereas the other one is an elected surgery. And I don't know the extent of those. It wouldn't surprise me if there was the language in a lot of this legislation tends to be vague and unclear and very broad to give it sort of the widest possible like enforcement. And god damn, we can talk for hours about like how the hell you're even going to enforce this ban. Who the hell is going to investigate? How do you even go about that?
I'm sure there's ample amounts of zealots out there that are chomping at the bit to do their holy due diligence.
Yeah, but what new like institutions and stuff will spring up too?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they talked about, once again at this point, it's we're hearing a lot of chatter, right? If there's one thing that has presented itself time and time again, though, as a pretty buttoned down take, is that they're going to go as far as they can. They're going to go as far as they can for as long as they can. The fact that people can get sued in another state, the fact that people have talked about making it illegal for a citizen of a state to go to another state to get one, that the state of residence or citizenship can actually exact punishment on someone leaving the state and going and perpetrating that.
Because we've never gone down this route. Like no one's ever done this, right?
The fact that, there are people that are in positions of power that are quoted as being all right with having a child carry a baby of rape full term, and they say this publicly, like, that's some pretty fucked shit. Like, it's not. And you got, I think you were right on the hit, Dave. I mean, 3 cis males here, allies, but it disgusts me as an observer, as a person who loves my cisgendered female spouse, partner, life mate, my daughter. That's at least how I identify her right now, and I can't even, there's not words. And I'm coming from being a Catholic, a very ardent, hardcore, anti-abortion Catholic. I mean, Jake and I used to have some pretty intense debates back in the day, and any procedure in which a person has to make a moral, existential, life-altering decision is something that is, in and of itself, grave, whatever that procedure may be. And for some people, it's not, because it's not an existential decision. It's a clump of cells, and the science backs that.
To my story, I did not find out about my scenario until I was 19 years old, and my mom broke down to me crying for the guilt she was carrying for having aborted a child. So I don't speak of my situation lightly. Like, I do recognize what it carries as well.
There's some people it's a thing where I still don't know where I stand on the outside, you know, like being on the outside, the science says that it's a group of cells. Does it have sentience? Depends on the stage, you know. Like I know as a father, being able to hear the heartbeat of this little, you know, situation that's growing inside of my wife's womb, I cried out of happiness. Those are tears of joy, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
but that was a trajectory that we chose to be on. That was a trajectory that we wanted to enact in our lives. That was something that we had agency over because I believe a certain thing, right? We have to have a bare minimum. We have to have a baseline. We have to have a common space of factual parameters, at least. And all of the supporting extraneous information from the opposing side is negated by the sovereignty, the personhood of the mother. Period. That's it. There is no baby without the mother. And we can go into this debate of like, well, there is no baby without the father. No, no, no. There is no
No,
baby
no, the baby
without
is attached to the mother,
exactly
physically connected.
like over the years the evolution of the perspective, right? Because to Catholics, the to the paper Catholics, right? Uh, any infringement upon conception is diabolical.
Right.
Like, if
The
you are nutting, that better produce offspring. And if it doesn't, then it wasn't God's will. But anything that you do is a deviation of that will, that divine interaction. And
Wait, are we talking about like the Crusades Catholic Church, the Inquisition Catholic Church, the
yeah,
the Nazi loving Catholic Church? These people care about life?
the move around priests, Catholic Church, yeah, we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
I didn't want to bring that up. Let's talk about kids, huh?
Yeah.
and like I said, don't get me wrong, there's some truths in the institution. I'm not saying all Catholics
Yeah.
are bad or, you know, fuck the church. I won't go that far. There's some things that exist there that have historically been good, but that that's a church. The United States is not a church. It's a pretty simple cut down
Yeah.
equation, like separation of church and state. Why? Because there's different churches. There's only one state, different churches. You don't allow one entity more rights over another entity. I mean, that's the entire thing that we've been trying to do since the inception. Well, no, I shouldn't say since the inception of this country, because we said that people weren't people and
No,
women
no.
weren't people.
Since the inception of civilization.
Right.
It's a fight that goes back a long time.
Yeah.
I don't, I don't know though, man. Like,
It's what I'm writing about.
there's definitely some baggage with the creation of civilization,
Yeah,
and we're talking about
yeah,
that baggage like right now, right?
yeah.
It's
Yeah, this is tied to it.
To roll back and give some context to some of the things that Benji mentioned about states being able to like police other states. That was a recent thing that went down in Texas where they tried to enact this state law to essentially like deputize folks through this hotline service on their website so that you could call in and drop a dime on people who you thought were leaving the state in order to secure an abortion.
Jesus.
And it was one of those things where just immediately everyone just called that number just to clog it up and essentially fill up the voicemail so nobody could call it in and leave any messages. But that was the thing that like really kind of like scared the shit out of me about this was thinking about like I know enough about government to know that they will take the path of essentially the laziest path that's available and open to them. And I can just think like they're probably not going to create a new department to enforce a lot of this stuff. Some of the really zealous ones might, the really zealous state governments might, but for the most part, I can imagine that they're just going to deputize people in order to try to enact a lot of these restrictions. And one thing that we talked about in the second episode of the show is about this like increasingly armed populace. And this is already a faction of the country, the so-called pro-lifers, right? Who blew up abortion clinics and shot doctors. Like this is like an intense amount of political violence that's coming out from the side who just like secured this massive victory.
It's because
Go
go
ahead,
ahead, Dave.
Vince. Oh no, I
Uh,
wasn't going to add anything. I was going to talk a little bit more about Roe.
I think you should.
Oh,
Mine can wait.
sure. And to go back, because I wanted to actually look up a little bit about the court case itself, about Roe, and it was a woman named Norma McCorvey who wanted to get an abortion, but she lived in Texas, and it's just Texas is just always at the center of a lot of this stuff. And she already had 2 kids, and she was prevented from getting one. And of course, the court case makes its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court famously ruled in favor of Roe on the bounds of the 14th Amendment, which is the Due Process Amendment that says that citizens have a right to privacy. And part of that privacy is deciding which medical procedures you do and do not want to have. It's essentially the privacy of bodily autonomy. It's the thing that prevents me from dragging Benji into a hospital and forcing him to give me one of his kidneys. It's the thing that that basically says that you have the right to make decisions for yourself and for your body.
Yeah, we can't even take your corpse's organs without your prior consent.
Right. And that's basically stayed on the books up until the 1990s. It was 1992, I believe, is Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which you saw the introduction of the language of undue burden, which said that states could limit access to abortion so long as that limitation wasn't an undue burden to the person seeking the procedure. Now, that's extremely vague and incredibly unclear, and was basically put into place so people would have to work their way up through state court systems and try to argue everything out as to what was and was not an undue burden. And it would be like one of those things where someone had to drive 400 miles to get to the only clinic that was open. And
the only clinic in the state.
Yeah. And
see, everyone has access.
Right. Or you might not even be able to book the appointment within the window that you could even legally get the procedure done, because there's only one like clinic in the entire state. This is the case in a lot of places along the South, places like Texas and Mississippi and Missouri. Maybe not so much Missouri, but places like Alabama, Mississippi, and Texas. There just aren't clinics available, and you have these just long-running cases being brought up in state and federal Supreme Courts, just constantly arguing what is and is not an undue burden. And it wasn't until 2022 with Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization that the Supreme Court, in a party line vote, decided to basically just completely nuke that ruling and reverse all that precedence. And you have immediately, now that we have this context in place, we can sort of talk about it, like what happened immediately after that and what is probably going to come down the pipe, and talk about the reasonings behind it, about why the government is even interested in doing this kind of thing in the first place, about the kind of religious factions that have made their way into the, one of our 2 political parties, and have been able to swing this influence and bring to fruition what has been like a 50-year political project. And it's just nuts. And especially when you have a Supreme Court justice be like, and next I think we should target gay marriage, and next I think we should target your right to contraception. And I don't know what's next on it. Anti-miscegenation laws? Like, what the fuck else are they going to do? Are they going to reverse Loving v. Virginia and completely nullify Benji and Mine's like marriage?
He didn't suggest that. I wonder why.
Because he's married to a white woman, right?
Right?
And yeah, and it's just like I'm pretty sure that's the same due process amendment that protects of those other supposed rights, right? That turn out just to be privileges that can be sort of were never sort of equally enforced and equally given, and can basically be revoked from anyone, so long as the government decides they want to. But yeah, I don't know. It's nuts. It's enough to make your head spin. Especially when you consider the conservative movement in the judiciary didn't really take up abortion as a fight until relatively like recently, like something kind of after Roe passes. You see it pick up more like in the 1980s and especially in the 1990s, as you get one sort of moral crisis after another. I'm using moral crisis in like scare quotes, as you start to see more and more politically and socially these comments about like deviancy and the policing of behavior and the policing of people and what they want to, and like how they sort of choose to execute their own freedoms and stuff like that. And we'll tie that stuff back around into, why do people really want to ban this? Why do they think it's so abhorrent? Why do they think it is like unconscionable? And it has almost less to do with the idea of this being some sort of like prenatal like genocide, which is the language that they'll use to talk about a lot of this stuff, right? Like there's some supposed lost generation out there of people that have been sort of wiped away by elective abortions, when really I'm pretty sure you could apply that same argument to every miscarriage that had ever been had, and it would be it makes just about as much sense to say it in that regard too. Like you're arguing for a negative that doesn't exist. Like, well, like what the fuck are you even talking about? Like God, it's one of those things where you say like, well, God's kind of the biggest abortion doctor there is, right? Considering that like half of each pregnancy kind of doesn't even make it to term. But you want to sit here and talk about, anyway, we can discuss like the disingenuousness of a lot of those arguments on the right and how they kind of just exist to strip women of any sort of bodily autonomy, and that just appears to be the case. Like, it's so hard to try to think of a logical argument for any of it because it isn't. It's completely ideological.
So much of the identity of the people that are persecuting women in this context and in many contexts, right, is founded out of that oppositional gaze where, in order for X identity to exist, Y identity must exist in a certain space with certain parameters, and if you deviate from said parameters or you remove power or give power, it could affect the identity, right? So, like, women having bodily autonomy, well, now all of a sudden, holy shit, what does that mean for men, right? Which is weird to think about, but
it's all reactionary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's reactionary. It's toxic masculinity at its finest, right? It's literally mansplaining to the worst possible fucking degree imaginable. Like, give birth to this because this is a human being. Like, I've seen so many arguments of, well, where's the father's rights? You know what, motherfucker? You gave up those rights when you blasted it inside of her. That's when you gave it up, motherfucker. Like, why wasn't it wrapped? Why weren't you doing the necessary precautions? Why didn't you have a vasectomy? Why the fuck are you, like, there's so many things that it's like, no, no, you don't. Women do not get to be the punching bag anymore. They just don't fucking get to be. Yeah, always. Always the fucking punching bag. Always. Like, you name it. Cis women, trans women, just everybody that has an association with this quote unquote feminine existence, right? As we perceive it in Western society, just gets the shit kicked out of him fucking time and time again. Time and time again. It's absolutely fucking mind blowing. It's insane. And oh my god, the circling back around to what you were saying, Dave, it's a power play. Everything that I've observed up until this point is a power play. I don't necessarily know, and I'd have to research it more. I need to probably for our next discussion on it, but I'm not entirely convinced that it wasn't a means of galvanizing the battle lines even harder, even more intensely, even more ardently, as an understanding of what's coming. Because in a lot of ways, this is going to benefit Dems in a lot of ways. Like you're fucking with white women now, right? That's a large demographic that all of a sudden is going to go, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's a large demographic that also, in a pretty wide majority, also voted for Trump too. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where one thing that my partner's been doing has been watching a lot of the reaction, and boy, there's just been a ton of just slacktivism that has kind of popped up around a lot of this. It's a lot of people being like, "Oh, let's not buy anything the 4th of July weekend. That'll really show them." And it's, oh boy, I really wish there was a way to enact meaningful change that didn't require you to actually do anything. But I don't know if that's gonna cut it. But Benji, like exactly what you said, something that I heard someone mention, and I've been thinking about a lot is, and this is something it's you're not seeing so much. What we're seeing, oh shit, how do I even phrase this? What we're seeing isn't anything that is supposed to make sense because it is just the execution of power. It is just people doing these things and limiting these rights because they can. That's why there is no there's no reasoning behind it. There is no. I mean, the reasoning behind it is just so thin, so layered, so thinly layered that it can be very easily sort of argued against and disproven. And for 50 years it was. But yeah, there's a certain faction and ideology in this country that is in power right now through the court system, and they're just executing that power. And that's terrifying, especially when the people who are supposed to stop that thing, which would be the Democratic Party, one, I sit here and think like, this has got to be the end of the fucking party, man. Like the thing that they have, the thing that they have put their cornerstone on for their entire contemporary history in this country has been like Roe, has been like, we will be the people who will keep Roe on the books. We will enshrine it in the law, which they never did, even though they had a supermajority during the Obama administration. This is one of those things where abortion advocates were like, hey, you need to like enshrine this thing in the Constitution now. Yeah, you need to get this shit ratified now, because if you leave it up to the court, another court can come in there and completely nuke it, And it was something that they just said, no, we'll get to it when we get to it. We just don't think the time's really right now. And
we got money issues first.
Yeah, it's just
you're talking about, and it's difficult. It's difficult to critique the Obama administration in a lot of ways, because it's a layered analysis. There's a lot of things going on. There's a historical narrative of like, wow, this is the first time you have a president of color, black president. Like there are a lot of things, right? But at the same time, the man was a human. The administration was an American administration vested in capitalism and fucking represented by one of the two flavors of capitalism in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, that fucking administration listening to the horrors of fucking drone strikes and the fucking horrible shit done during wartime. Like the idea, I guess that's what's kind of scary about what could possibly come from this all, right? Because there are those of us that are left leaning that want a better world, and we want the system to come down and to rebuild anew in a way that is peaceful, in a way that is generative, like allows people to flourish and grow and thrive and save the planet and engage in being the best that we possibly can fucking be, right? And then there's the people that are scared fucking shitless of all of that, and they have guns. And fuck, man, like so many people, even right now, people are sitting there going, this is why you motherfuckers should have voted for Hillary Clinton. And you can make an argument to that, but it falls short of something that's sustainable. Like if the entire trajectory of success for a movement or an ideology or, you know, a change, a systemic change is one fucking person, we've got some big fucking problems, man. Like,
Yeah.
you want a messiah? A corporate messiah? No, that's
But
fucked.
that's their faith.
Yeah.
What scares me is not that they have guns, is that they're starting to say again that your presence threatens me. Now that they got guns and they're saying that again, yeah.
Well, see, and for me, they could fucking say that if they didn't have guns. Fuck them.
Yeah, right.
Be on the street corner.
Yeah, I don't care.
Your presence bothers me.
But
Okay,
when you
cool.
start saying that with a gun, you start like defending yourself from a distance, and it gets scary.
Yeah, you can't really square up and throw chingazos against a bullet.
No,
In
no.
defense, right?
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, right? That's the other thing that's underlying all of this nonsensical bullshit is that this country is an offensive country,
Right.
offensive and offensive.
It's war.
Mhm.
But
It's built on
literally,
war.
it,
We've
it
had
can't.
like what 7 years of no war or something in our entire history.
Well, and I bet you even in those fucking 7 years, we were economically suppressing or fucking, you know,
Well, I mean, someone's got to breathe some point.
materially fucking coercing people. Like, just because we weren't dropping bombs or fucking shooting shit, best believe we had our fingers on some stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it. This place is all about just fucking with people, man. Like, it just can't chill the fuck out. Like, it can't take a beat for a second and go, oh, what does the populace want? What actually? And I'm not talking like the loudest, shittiest. You know, you get a room full of people, 100 people in a room. You're going to smell the person that shit his drawers. You're not going to necessarily notice the hundreds of people or the other 100 people that either smell great or don't smell at all. You're going to notice the motherfucker that shit his pants. Why? Because it stinks.
Yeah. Speaking of the state being able to just sort of meddle in people's lives and do whatever it wanted. One thing I wanted to kind of think about in regards to this conversation was there ever a time where the state would enforce an abortion? If the state right now is enforcing pregnancy, is there a
Sparta.
time? Yeah, if there was a time when the United States in particular would enforce an abortion, and
Sparta don't care, man. Sparta throw them babies off cliffs.
yeah, as they look over the newborn and be like, he's got a funny foot.
That's the first one that comes to my head about like state sponsored abortion. But that's
Yeah.
kind of rare. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Nazis were for it. You can't be for a eugenics supremacist view and not be very, very, very pro-abortion, not pro-choice, pro-abortion.
You know, and that's something that kind of like circles back into this conversation a little bit. Was the United States would, if you were in the military and you were a woman up until like the late 70s, early 80s, and you got pregnant, the military basically made you get an abortion. They would not, I mean, they do it in the very military way where you have to sort of go get it done or else you're just sort of out. And they do it in this way where, like, technically it's voluntary and you're going to volunteer for this. Otherwise, you're not going to be in the military anymore. And
Sign that you volunteer right here.
yeah, and it was something where a woman had to essentially go to the Supreme Court to essentially, and this is something also backs into Roe because it got the government out of the business of regulating pregnancy. Because if the government can compel you to have an abortion, they can also compel you to carry a pregnancy to term, because the government has essentially given itself that authority now. So I sit here and I think about, like, it's put itself in the business of regulating pregnancy once again. And depending on who you are in this country, you probably have an experience with the state regulating pregnancy before. Because I know black women in America have experienced this before during slavery. After the banning of the transatlantic slave trade, you had pregnancy was regulated on the plantation. You had black men going in for seemingly benign medical procedures and then finding themselves chemically castrated by the state. So this is something where,
syphilis experiment.
yeah, and the Tuskegee like syphilis experiment, stuff like that. But you had
Black women just being sterilized.
Yeah.
right. Those chemical castrations happened, like, state of California for a really long time was also even lobotomizing black women as well. If they came in through like state hospitals or like prison systems and stuff like that. And it was, I think about the government got its ass out of regulating pregnancy after it had done it for the majority of its history, right? And we had a very short time contemporarily, only from the 1970s to 2022, where the government didn't regulate it, where the government didn't enforce an abortion whether you were working for the state, where the government didn't force you to take your pregnancy to term. It didn't compel your pregnancy. And it's one of those things where I think a lot about the conversations around this and the conversations of white women who are like, we're hurtling down this path to like Gilead and the Handmaid's Tale and stuff like that. And I just sit here and I think, I'm like, well, black women already lived in Gilead. It was called the United States. It was called Georgia. It was called South Carolina. And they usually already lived that experience. And I try to think about, like, who won out of this ruling. And one of the big things, Ben, you already hit on this, that this is a big win for chauvinism. Like, this is something where I try to think about, like, pulling out the camera lens to sort of like look at the macro. Why would the state kind of be interested in doing anything like this? And I could see it from an ideology of chauvinism, of keeping women sort of saddled with children, keeping women saddled with pregnancy in a way that
knowing their place.
Right. And it's one of those things where we already know that, like, maternity, in the current way that we have a lot of our corporate structures are set up, the way that all of our corporate structures operate, the way that our economy operates, that when women take maternity leave, when dads take paternity leave, they end up earning less overall over the entire course of their career, because this country will so punish someone for never showing up to work, right? So now you have in place states that are going to compel women to carry pregnancies to term, and which then they're going to have to take care of those children as well. That you have the active removal of women from areas where they used to compete with men for jobs, where they used to compete with men for social status, for all these other things. So I feel like chauvinism gets a big win. I feel like white supremacy got a big win out of this. You saw sitting representatives in Congress say the most racist shit after Roe got overturned. Where Representative Mary Miller out of Illinois said at a Trump rally that the overturning of Roe was a win for white life. And what she's hitting on right there is the great replacement theory. It's this idea that white supremacists have that somehow brown people are just going to have more children than white people are. And then suddenly, oh no, America's not going to be a majority white state anymore. And
that terrifies them.
right, and that terrifies them because it's just one of those things where white people are always deathly
Because
afraid.
they know how brown people are treated. And yeah.
Well, I hate to break it to the motherfuckers, but look at the world, the population of the fucking world, and see who's actually the minority in the world. Fuck.
Right, and it's a wonder how 30% of the world managed to economically control all of it. The armies went home, but the banks sort of stayed, and that's a whole other episode when we talk about global sort of supremacy.
The armies went to work.
That's true. The other sitting member of Congress that talked about this was John Cornyn from Texas. He said, now do Plessy versus Ferguson. He said, now do Brown versus the Board of Education. I'm like, motherfucker, you want to bring back segregation?
Yeah.
Of course he does. Of
Of course. And it's just, so it's a big win for white supremacy. It's a big win for capital, right? There's a steady stream of laborers still. It's just, And one thing we talked about companies getting involved in this is something me and my partner were talking about, where companies are now, coming out with these press releases talking about how we support our family employees and stuff like that. We're going to pay for the travel. We're going to pay for the cost of the procedure and stuff like that. We're going to make sure that abortion care is covered in our business. And my partner pointed out that this was one of those things where, well, people are already pretty much tied to their jobs because of health insurance. This is going to be one of those things that can further tie people to their employer. If your only access to abortion services is through the person who signs your paycheck, you'll probably not leave that because that's a pretty good security blanket to have for yourself, is to say like, well, I still have bodily autonomy because my fucking boss helps me have bodily autonomy. So I'm really not looking forward to that.
Dave.
Oh no, go ahead. I was done. I was done with those points. Right.
You just got me to realize, like, keep them pregnant and in the kitchen, and it keeps everyone working. Working.
You got me thinking about what you guys talked about the last episode of that fucking show, The Expanse. Like, you're gonna be part of the fucking company, man. Like, just do what we need you to do, and you can get your legs. Fuck.
Yeah.
Wilsar brings up a good point. I don't even fucking. I wish I was more on it with this episode, man, but it's just so like mind numbingly.
Well, what can you do other than keep talking about it with people? Provide support for camping trips for anyone that needs to take them, and I guess we're still battling this through the courts.
One thing that's kind of, I have a little bit of just hope for is like autonomous, like self-organization and that kind of thing, is the idea that people are pretty connected in ways that just weren't really around. Or rather, it is kind of easier to sort of find these connections, find these networks of people who can help like pay for things or to help like provide services and stuff like that. And like, it's one thing I remember seeing people posting at least was a lot of lawyers who particularly work around things like data privacy and stuff like that came out with a lot of really helpful information to help people sort of cover their ass, because when we talk about enforcement of these bans and stuff like that, a lot of these like period tracking apps, social media companies, they're basically going to just hand over all of your content, all your posting and all your data to any law enforcement service that asks. They already do that. So it's one of those things where if you are tracking your like menstrual cycle through an app and you get pregnant, of course the app is going to sort of know and notice that.
Trigger, flag it.
Right. And then suddenly you that pregnancy is no more, that could flag something with the state to like trigger an investigation or something like that. So there's people who are already sharing information to help people like protect themselves, and it's not an ideal situation. It's definitely people coming together to make the best out of a really shitty thing that's happening. But it's one of those things that gives me at least just a little bit of hope to know that just like, boy, people, man, those, I think about a lot of abortion writers that came through when I was working at the bookstore and stuff like that, and how they were like, these were like women who were like on the front lines of this fight, like in the 70s and stuff like that, who worked on a lot of that organization, worked around a lot of that legislation, and have just we're spending the last 50 years talking about why this is important and why it needs to happen and why bodily autonomy is necessary for like the equal, like equitable, like treatment for women in our society. And it was something that was like really, it was really enlightening, and I something that I was lucky to be able to get exposed to thoughts and get exposed to those ideas, because it was certainly something that it made me see it in a more enlightened way, in a more informed way.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's I still think that we have to, the days of like silence are over. Like they can't, like Jake was saying, yeah, support people and it's still talk with people, but I think it's got to go above just talking with people. I think chauvinism needs to be called out. Obviously, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to get fucking gacked, but you know, the tiniest little action of, hey, no, this is not, it's not all right. Even as something as simple as asking a question, like, well, I'm pro-life. Oh, okay. So you must be against war? Oh, no. Oh. So then you must be for taking care of all the homeless people? No. Oh. So you must be anti-gun? No. Oh. So you said you're pro-life, though. What does that mean? Like, something as simple as that. Because people that just shoot that shit. I know for me, when I used to fucking say that shit, oh, I'm for, the sanctity of life. I actually was for the sanctity of life because I've never been a person that's really enjoyed violence at all. But the violence that's being perpetrated against women and there's tons of examples. Some of them are egregious. Some of them are pretty potent, like one of the big ones that got me was like, there's this lady that's on a skyscraper and she's got a jar full of theoretical zygotes and she's got, a 3-year-old. What are you going to chuck off the skyscraper if you had the choice?
What name are you going to give the 3-year-old?
Yeah.
I like this. I like that version of Sophie's Choice better. One thing that kills me about the entire is that when we talk about like the execution of power was that for some reason the conservative movement in this country has gotten such a stranglehold on our court system that they're able to use courts to essentially turn like culture war grievances into laws, which is like when Benji say some sort of action has to happen. I totally agree. There has to be some kind of organization. There has to be some sort of pushback, because the Democratic Party has just, their response was to sing "God Bless America," which no one under the age of 60 knows all the words to that song. And it's
one thing you got to remember though is that they are the moral majority, so they've been legislating and judgifying on morality. That's all they know how to do, to rule.
And another thing that Democrats have been like really like open about is they basically have communicated they're not going to do anything unless we entirely like gang press them into the fight. So it's just like it's kind of been like really loud and clear when you. Well, first off, the White House is making Kamala Harris go and do all these like interviews in the wake of this ruling and stuff like that, right? So I don't envy her having to go be the face of this bullshit administration after this completely like lackluster desire or this lackluster disaster that has just taken place on their watch. But they basically said if they want them to go to battle for us, we're going to have to hog them in battle. And I don't know anyone who is doing that or organization who's capable of doing that. Because that's exactly what the Democratic Party said around civil rights too.
But check this out. If we go to battle against them and keep it going in the courts, well, work needs to be done tomorrow, so business keeps going.
Yeah.
And that's why you got to push the Democrats, because business needs to keep going.
It's one of those things that I think you can subvert from within with that party, unfortunately, because that is the only party at this particular point in time that offers any launching point. But I definitely don't think that you stay with it, and I definitely don't think that you do what Bernie does. You shove and jive as you have to, because that's the only fucking spot at the table that allows you to even fucking clean your silverware, like clink your silverware. But like, you don't get to. We wouldn't get to do that on the Republican side. We wouldn't get to do that, And the crazy thing is that the Republican side has broken into factions. I mean, there's the fucking America First faction, which driving around town, you can see that shit. Those motherfuckers are out. Like, there's a guy going for it right now in this district for House of Representatives, and it literally says right on his stuff, America First Republican. Wow.
Oh my God, I can't believe we're going to elect Charles Lindbergh in 2024. Like that just seems absolutely crazy to me. It's just just a lot of what's happening a lot of what's happening to the American First Party. They would have like really found themselves at home in the American Bund in the 1930s.
Well, you've seen the KKK pictures, right, Dave, where they're marching down the street, and it says America First.
Yeah, it's not a new slogan.
No, that was I think that was actually Lindbergh's fucking presidential campaign slogan. He was part of the American Fascist Party.
Yeah, just like what was it, Reagan or someone said, "Make America great again." First,
yeah.
it was back.
He just said, "Make America great." Yeah. So you just add the again, and yeah.
No, keep America great. That was the 2020 campaign for the Trump administration.
Hag. Yeah. Fuck. See, that's the thing, though. That's and I had talked a little bit to Jake about this. I think actually, Dave, you were on that thread in the text as well. Like, it's on the left, and I fucking hate to say it because it's counterintuitive to the ideology of open-mindedness and having philosophical inquiry and debate and all that type of stuff. But we have got to fucking strap in, man. Like, there are legitimate grievances to be had between philosophical ideologies, absolutely 100%. And not to get it twisted, like, neoliberalism fucking sucks. Like, we know this. But we need a win. We need a fucking win. And it's got to be creative, and it's got to be fucking hardcore. The idea of a Biden or of a fucking Hillary Clinton or any of that bullshit, it's got to be done. If we have to elect these motherfuckers, then the follow-up is complete and wholehearted clean house on the other aspects of government and at the local level. Like, it has to be done. It has to be done. There are so many people that are scared, and I understand. I get it. And like Jake said, we've got to work. I get that too. But that type of autonomous, the type of stuff that happened during we're still in the pandemic, but earlier on in the pandemic, when people were helping rub a few nickels together so that other people could eat, various things like that. Like that's the type of shit that's going to happen because this is the next phase of the American pandemic,
Yeah.
capitalistic fucking decline pandemic. The fucking and the thing of it is that the ruling party, like the ruling crews of the two parties, I don't give a fuck. Let us kill each other in the streets as long as the threshold percentage still shows up to fucking work every day to keep the machines going. Whatevs. So I mean, we've got to get uncomfortable. That is one thing that the generation before us was way more willing to fucking do, was get uncomfortable. Actually, not even get uncomfortable. They were fucking uncomfortable. They
Yeah.
had enough with being uncomfortable. They were like, fuck this shit.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to get uncomfortable. It's going to have to be, hey, this doesn't fucking jive anymore, man. This doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, especially considering how much capital is sort of failing to, like, or rather, I would classify it as like the diminishing returns of capital as well that have, tech didn't save us. Tech gave us shiny things to plug into our wall that sell all of our information to advertisers. That's all they gave us. We're getting raked over the coals in terms of like fuel prices. We've hit peak oil. We have out of control like climate change. Like shit is already like massively fucked. And it just reaction to this is fascism, or I don't know, maybe spread the wealth around. Like those seem to be the two options, at least as whereas this country could like potentially head. And there's so much anger and there's so much resentment at this entire population of people who are completely being dicked over by the systems that they have married themselves to for, 2.5 centuries now, longer than that probably, and are just wondering why, suddenly everything isn't as good as it was before. And it just, well, the people who are fucking me are telling me it's these people's fault. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on being mean to these people. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just the complete erosion of any sort of common sense because I keep thinking about in regards to like this debate specific around abortion in particular, is like for a long time, this has been one of those discussions where people can sort of choose their own boutique reality that they kind of wanted to live in regards to this like point, and in regards to like many other political points in this country. And when I hear people talk about us living in a post-truth society, it wasn't just because we have a president who lied a lot. They all lie. It was because we were sort of entering into an era where there was no authority anymore to sort of classify what was being put into our media as this is what happened and this is when it happened, this is how it happened, and this is who it happened to. Everything became this sort of game. It was like the ESPNification of fucking American politics, where Benji mentioned like local elections and stuff like that. We are a deeply apathetic and uninformed populace that doesn't pay attention to politics at local or state level almost ever. Like when people say that they're political in this country, and I use scare quotes around political, these are people who watch like cable news on weekends and watch like national politics sort of unfold, and they kind of pick their team and their sides.
Yeah, they they endorse their party team.
Right. And it's just like,
Go color.
yeah, it's the greens and the blues. And it's one of those things where there's so much
It's
more.
the reds and the blues both waving a green flag.
Yeah. Um, I like that. But it's I don't know, man. It's buck wild too. I totally forgot the point I was going to say, but
Sorry.
no, you're okay. It was just about anyway. the sort of like fracturing of like American politics and so sort of the rise of populism, the rise of American fascism, and we've been kind of ringing this death knell on American democracy, which is kind of funny because we've kind of never been all that democratic to begin with. But I don't know. It's just
No, actually, I found out an interesting little tidbit that goes along those lines. Something like in 2012 and 2014, only 4% of Congress had working class backgrounds.
that doesn't surprise me at all.
So, we are not democratic. We are being represented by the elite.
Yeah, I think God, they're almost all lawyers. Uh,
Well, lawyers and business owners,
yeah,
either
yeah,
either married to cousins of something along those lines.
yeah.
Every one of our
To the Hunter's or
presidents.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, look at our presidents. Every one of them for a long time were just related and in money families.
Mhm. And that's also been a really frustrating thing about the institution of the Supreme Court as well, where it is so insular and it is so elitist as an institution as well, where Sotomayor, who is probably the most progressive member of the court, and I'm a little hesitant even using that description to describe her because it's hard to be progressive and then be on the United States Supreme Court, which
Yeah,
is an intentionally
that's
sort of
activism.
yeah, it's
Now,
an
excuse me
intentionally
while I hold these words to my 1777 interpretation.
yeah, it's an intentionally reactionary institution. Laws are almost always drafted in reaction to events as they happen. You don't really get like preventative like legislation and stuff like that. But they all go to the same schools. They all serve on the Fifth Circuit. They all do these things. They all eat lunch with each other, and then they just sit there and say like, well, he votes to strip Americans of their rights, but but he's just so principled. That was something that Sotomayor had to say about Clarence Thomas about just, well, there's no one on the court more principled than him. I'm just like, that is certainly one way to put it. And it's just, yeah, it's just there is no justice, there is no logic behind it. There's only power.
You cannot have, in my opinion, a judge that expresses any sort of political bent. Period. Like you
Yeah.
can't. You just that's not a fucking thing. Like it is because it exists, but that's not how it should be. Like you shouldn't. There shouldn't be a conservative judge, and there shouldn't be a liberal judge. There should be a judge. There should be literally a person that is capable of, and the Supreme Court, in my opinion, should literally be a court specifically for reviewing, itemizing, and streamlining the arguments in aggregate across the country that was founded in the lower appellate courts and coming up with a decision based on
Well said.
the work done on the ground. Like that's their fucking job. Like they don't need to sit there and be like, well, according to the fuck you. This was the argument in Massachusetts. This was the argument in Florida. This was the argument in California. Of the three,
Here's how
two
they
had
apply.
two had the trajectory going this way, standard precedent. Fuck you. You're not gonna go immediately against it. You're not gonna fucking no. And the other thing that you're going to have is you're going to have a fucking accountability complex or matrix that allows for appellate courts to review your shit, motherfuckers. Like, you don't get to just be up there in your goddamn ivory tower and make decisions with people's lives like that. Fuck you. Like, you are not deities. You are not like the tribunal of the elders that, oh fuck, sacrifice the young virgin during the carnea. Like, fuck yourself. You're going to listen to the lower appellate courts. You're going to listen to the people on the ground that are doing the actual fucking work. And you're going to review it based on the laws in totality of the country and not just the fucking Constitution. because
Right.
all the laws that were created in this country are based on that, right? So you're able to gain an even better understanding by looking at what the fuck, this doesn't work, this does. You can juxtaposition precedent, narrative, trajectory. There's a multitude of things. These constitutional literalists can go and fuck themselves because the Constitution, in and of itself, is a fluid document. Like, it was created at the founding. We're not still, this is not the 200th year of the fucking founding. We're rolling, motherfuckers. Try to
Oh
keep
yeah.
up. Like, oh, it's frustrating. And when we talk about local stuff, we've got to. We fucking got to. I'm very much so with Jake. We've talked about this in the past. The fucking Senate can go. Like, or if we're gonna keep
Yeah.
it, if we're gonna keep it,
Dude, the Senate is purely for business interests. It's not states' rights. Who runs the states? Business runs the states.
especially if a business can fucking go into North, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, fucking Nebraska, and they can go in there and they could fucking dump Wyoming, whatever the fuck they want into. Now they have the power to destroy whatever voice California and Oregon and Washington have. Like, get the fuck out
Yeah,
of here.
it's like 238 votes to 1 or something like that when
If
you
you're gonna
put like Wyoming against California.
if you're gonna do a Senate, it's got to be like the House of Representatives in the sense of it is population based, right? And
No, 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 no. You're talking democracy here, man. No. We
yeah,
can't go down this road. No. We can
and
do a
then
Yeah.
census to tax our people. We can't. No.
hold on, we can do a census to find out where all the brownies live, so that way we can draw maps around that.
Well,
But
government's been doing a census for millennia.
it's it's one of those things that it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know if I'll at this point. I don't know if I'll leave this state currently. You know what I mean? Like the way things have been going, we're all right. I can't fucking stand Eastern Washington. I'm
Yeah.
very hopeful that a blue, not even blue, fuck that word, a left leaning
A
wave
purple wave, man.
will hit here. Yeah, a
That
purple
has so many
haze.
entendres to it. I love it.
I'd like to call it a purple haze. That's what I'd like to call it.
Well, I mean, come on. We are not conservative. We are not freaking democratic, as in we are not red, we are not blue. We're purple.
I'm definitely left leaning. I'm definitely the biggest thing.
Yeah, but our blue's not left leaning. That's the problem.
Yeah,
I am purple
Yeah.
is left leaning. I agree that.
yeah. Fuck the Rainbow Coalition. That would be dope.
Mhm.
Like the biggest point is, and going back to what we were talking about of Roe versus Wade, right? We are seeing right before our eyes a group of people that have always ran this shit basically laying their dick out on the table. And it
Yeah,
is
through
incumbent
dominance.
upon us, the rest of the people, to fucking bald fist smash that shit and send it packing. Like the idea that religious zealotry, phobias, like xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, fucking monetary supremacy, all that type of shit's got to be out the fucking window, and it's just got to be like, I've got no fucks to give anymore when it comes to the sensibilities of trying to appeal to conservatism. What I will do, and because we were talking about this with regarding this show, what we're doing here, this podcast, um, I do want people to come on over. I do want people to sit around the fire and listen to the yarn that we're about to spin. But at the same time, it's going to have to be people with open minds. Like there is something to be said about reaching out, and that for me, that's who I would like us to get, is the people that are the fence sitters, the people that maybe they are extremely devout in their religious affiliations to the point where they acknowledge, yeah, I can't fuck over another human being's life. It's not right. It's not right. The people that are like, yeah, I'm fucking anti-government, but I'm anti-government because I'm not for the misuse of my fucking taxes in Ponzi schemes and fucking international wars. Like, that's the type of people that I could see us bringing over from that are center to right leaning. And as Jake said, right, Blue is center in a lot of ways, if not slightly right. So those are the. I'm not. I'm done, dude. Like, I don't want to appeal to MAGAs. I don't want to appeal to that shit.
Yeah. Oh no, I was gonna say that I don't even think there is a way that you can. It's like one of those things where I wish that, like, facts and logic, and we can sort of like change a mind. And with them in particular, it's just really not going to happen because they've kind of so thoroughly drank the Kool-Aid of American exceptionalism and don't realize that this country is just another place. That a lot of what has been given to them has come at a distinct loss and inequity to others. And so they don't
No,
see
because
that
they've been
reality.
taught their whole life that you work hard and you earn what you work for.
And they think that they've earned everything that
That's
they have.
that's the lie, because soldiers go and fight for the king. And it really bugs me that people don't quite realize that, like, yes, the poor pay the price in war, but our middle class is a class of poor that is still paying the price of going to war, and they don't realize why. And
Yeah.
it bugs them because they feel like they are due more, and they're not getting their due.
Yeah. I think I was trying to make a point earlier about that kind of weird. I think a lot about Jordan Peterson, actually.
Fuck that guy.
And I think a lot about how he is recognizing shit that is like wrong in society and then coming to the exact wrong conclusion as
That's
like what's
cultural
calling
Marxism.
it. Right. It's just like, no, dog, that's capitalism. It's ruining your
Yeah.
life.
4 years ago, I listened to him, Dave, and I was like, wow, this is kind of interesting. And I listened a little more, and I went, wait a second. Because early on, the motherfucker was all about, self-help, so to speak, and like finding a way to be a more like powerful man based in like, an assessment of yourself. And
make your bed, clean your room.
He speaks in a almost hypnotically quixotic way, because he will kind of dazzle your brain with words, and they don't mean exactly necessarily what he means they mean, but he's talking about meaning, and he's very certain about what he means. So
Jody, or not Jody, Cody Shody, right? The Some More News. Have you watched that, Dave?
No, I haven't.
You should check that out.
It's an interesting show. Some of them I don't much care for. Some of them are really good.
Yeah, he's definitely all over the place, but I think he means well, and he calls out Jordan Peterson. He calls out Sam Harris. He calls out the intellectuals that hide behind their intellectualism.
Yeah, Cody is a former Cracked writer, I believe. Something along those lines. He's a former comedian of something on the internet.
But you're absolutely right, Dave. Jordan Peterson is I say fuck that guy because he has no problem, right, trying to eviscerate quote unquote feminine. Well, how would you like to quantify? How would you like to? How many women do you know are out there willing to go and dig coal out of the ground? Go fuck yourself, dude. Like, we can create whatever weird examples and nonsensical bullshit that we would like. How many women are willing to wear a fucking, an old school bathymetry suit and get weighted down and walk on the ocean floor. Well, number one, they didn't build those to fucking accommodate breasts, so I would imagine not very many. But like, fuck, you're like, what the fuck, idiot.
Jordan Peterson figured out how to monetize incels, which are basically like today's knights that are propertyless and can't find a damsel to marry them.
But the damsel's got to look good, Jake.
Oh yeah, she's got to fit his expectations.
Yep, she's got to do all the crazy nonsense.
And see, he's nice.
Yeah. I brought Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson speaks wisely.
Right. And I used Peterson as an example of a little bit of that right wing reactionary sort of train of thought that you have. It's a lot of like when people were like scrambling, kind of wringing their hands, wondering, oh, well, how did Trump get elected in the first place? I wonder how. And it's like, well, one, people resonated with him, mostly his racism, and he just sort of rode that all the way to the White House. But what people were talking about was just like, that's when the term, scare quotes, economic anxiety was being thrown around. And that was shorthand for, well, these white people are realizing they're getting screwed and they're mad about it and they're looking for someone to blame. And brought Peterson up as an example of people recognizing the symptoms, but getting the complete wrong diagnosis. And you have a lot of right-wing reactionaryism that is in reaction to a lot of the symptoms of people being screwed over by capital, of the increasingly, automated world that we live in, which every time we hit an economic recession, every time we hit a bust, more and more shit gets automated and that shit never comes back. So, you didn't have things like rideshare, like Uber and Lyft and stuff like that until you had the 2008 economic collapse. And, they're trying to push things like self-driving vehicles and stuff like that right now after the 2020 collapse with COVID and everything like that. And it's just, those people, I don't think that you can convince. And I think you're on to something about trying to like activate a population. There's certainly, only like 20% of people ever vote in any national election in this country. But there is there are people who can be like activated and shaken out of their complacency, because that's mostly this is something that my partner talks about constantly as someone who grew up outside the United States, is just like, well, Americans are tremendously lazy. We sit at home all day and watch TV in our air-conditioned houses and apartments. And it's like one thing that was happening during all the violence in 2020, coming up to the insurrection on January 6th, was I was talking to a friend of mine who served in the military, and she was deployed out in Liberia during the Ebola crisis out in West Africa a few years ago. And she was like, I think about this a lot, but in a lot of ways, Americans kind of aren't about that life. They're not about to go out in the streets and build roadblocks and shit like that. And, start a tire fire in the middle of City Hall. Like, Americans kind of aren't about, they do not activate and engage with their country's politics in a way that a lot of the rest of the world does. Because even a place like France, man, it seems like at least once a year you have, firefighters fist fighting cops in the streets of Paris, over like budgetary breakdown and stuff like that. And Americans are not about that life, man. We are a supremely complacent population. And it's one of those things where we have to, and I think that there's been diminishing returns on that complacency. I have a whole thesis about how the Keurig coffee machine is evidence that capital kind of can't provide for us anymore, at least not in the way that it promised to. That we have a machine now that, one, uses a proprietary pod that you have to buy from that company. It's more wasteful than it ever was. It's more expensive than it ever was. And it makes a product that is way worse than coffee used to be. But all for the, all for the
But
novelty.
it's
The novelty of
but it's a
giving you a
single
coffee in
serve
5 minutes.
cheese slice, man.
Right.
It's
Wrapped
an
in plastic,
individually wrapped single serve cheese slice.
wrapped in a petrochemical plastic, right? And
Oh Jesus.
it's like people can't. Anyway, we sort of kind of trailed off at the end of this conversation. This was a really long one. This sitting because so much of Roe being overturned is just is a symptom of a broader kind of sickness that we're all kind of experiencing and going through now. But if there's any last words anyone wants to say, Benj?
I was just gonna say, if you cannot, as a society, fucking take care of half of your population, you're fucking up, son. Like, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree with that, but like trying to speak from their side, they think the half is not taking care of itself.
It is kind of parentage in that way. That is part of that chauvinism too, right?
Yeah.
It's imposing your sort of control over another person and their own bodily autonomy.
But I got a whole argument that like government really is a stand-in for mom, basically. So yeah, I can get into that at some point. It's an interesting perspective that I've been looking at history with.
Interesting. We'll have to unpack that.
For sure.
Yeah.
The only thing about that other side, though, right, and I would caution everyone, is, it's good to play devil's advocate to a certain extent, but not lose sight of, as they would say, the forest for the trees.
Of what is actually happening. Yeah.
Yeah, because devil's advocate, I don't need to understand why Manson did the shit that he did as much as I need to put shit into place to prevent that from going down again at this particular point in time.
But to be fair, we're not confronting psychopaths.
Oh, I would argue.
They are people trained into psychopathic tendencies. I agree with that. But they are just people, fellow citizens that have been brought up in ways to view the world.
Yeah, I
And
know.
this is exactly how basically the Nazis killed 6 million people and look the other way because this is what we do. And they follow the leader. And it's like you get kind of scary when that boots start lockstepping.
It's the bystander effect. Go ahead, Benj.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that's absolutely right. They're people, and by no means would I ever want to condone any form of like prejudicial violence or any form of dehumanizing actionable consequence against people. I will say this though: just because a person has been trained to be a shitbag does not mean that I am going to willfully embrace that. Much like the Nazis, yes, they were people, but people had to sit there and go, no, motherfucker, you're not going to kill any more people. You're just not going to do it.
Yeah, like otherwise reasonable people can be convinced to do crazy things. I will still stop them if they are doing crazy things.
You have to. Like,
yeah. For our safety, you gotta stop.
And that's the only thing that I guess to expound on my last thing is that, and I think it's good what we're doing, but to waste energy trying to, we know they're human. We know conservatives in this country are human. We know that they eat, breathe, feel, that they dream, that they hope, that they love. We know this. They is only a placeholder for the fact that the ideology perpetrated by them is diametrically opposed to the ideology that we are trying to propagate and promulgate in this world. The ideology of peace, the ideology of love, the ideology of progress. And we have to potently stand in opposition to that and potently put the fucking foot down.
Well said. I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that pretty much kind of puts a nice little capstone on this conversation.
Yeah, it's like a good thing to
And
stand
I especially like previous statement you'd made about putting some sort of actual check and balance on the Supreme Court, because one thing that the whole putting justices in there by appointment was supposed to be one of those things where it was I don't know if it was meant to take the politics out of it, but I think we're all kind of on the other side of believing that our legal system in any way apolitical. It isn't, we elect our judges, which is something when you tell people in other countries to go, wait, America elects most of their judges. And we say, yeah, when you look at a ballot in any local election, there's a bunch of judges on there and nobody knows who the fuck they are or what the fuck they stand for or what
just
their
a name on a paper.
Yeah, or what their fucking record is in terms of their convictions and stuff like that. And it's nuts because
that name.
or hey, they were first, or they're the Dem, or they're the Republican. And it's one of those things where, judges will absolutely rule on cases in ways that they think will help them in the next election. So yeah, it's huge. Like, it's such a big conversation to talk about, like, the American justice system and stuff like that, and who it was actually designed to serve. And it surely wasn't designed to serve us. And shit's going to get a lot harder in the foreseeable future for folks, specifically because of recent Supreme Court rulings and what this entire system is kind of designed to do.
Everybody to fucking vote locally on this coming November.
Hell yeah, it's election year.
Everybody needs to fucking start going to city council meetings and school board meetings and fucking shit needs to start happening.
Oh yeah, watch a city council meeting. You'll see in local politics just how upfront a lot of the a lot of the corruption is just right out there in the open, especially during city council meetings, because they kind of know nobody's watching. So they'll just sit there and be like, all right, we're going to pull money out of this fund and send it to the police force, gavel, 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 and it's done. And there'll be like 4 people in the courtroom to be like, wait, what the fuck just happened? So yeah, get involved.
Even something as small as warden, like, fuck, man. Oh, you actually didn't come at the right time to voice your concern. You should have submitted it the week before. You needed to attend that city council meeting to then submit, your concern for the next city council meeting. Then, we'll have to review it at
Your request for audience.
Yeah, fuck you. I'm a citizen. I'm in here. You motherfuckers are in a meeting of my citizenry. I'm going to talk, you pieces of shit.
Right. Our roadblock, the petition we make you sign to try to prevent you from entering our office. Fuck, you got enough signatures. All right, we got to find some reason not to pay attention to you now.
Yeah, but let's piss you off so that way you cuss and we have to kick you out.
Hold on a second while I look up how to legally block you.
Well, I love you guys. Jake, as always, man. Dave.
Yeah, man. I love you guys too. Good. This was a really good convo. I'm glad that we to sit down and talk about it, even though it took a couple days to sit down. But
just a few days.